to introduce our speaker this evening. We are pleased to turn the time over to a longtime supporter of the Ogden School Foundation, Julie Lewis Williams. Julie?
Oh my gosh, I am so excited. I can't even tell you. It's like winning the lottery. I get to introduce Neil Gaiman. I have to talk really fast because I'm pretty sure that at any moment somebody's going to scream imposter and come, storm the stage, and it's going to come from one of these tables right over here, or my mother, which is equally as dangerous. So I got the added benefit. Neil Gaiman, can you believe it? He is one of two authors I would read anything, anywhere, anyhow that he made, created, did a TV show of, and I would know that I would fall immediately in love with it. And besides that, I got to sit with him at dinner and share with him that I was going to introduce him, and I thought, I've really created a beautiful speech. And I showed it to him and see what he thought about it, a little editing, and he handed it back to me. Thanks, Neil. It was nice. Like I said, anything that he writes, I would run and read, and have never been disappointed, and has stayed with me, including, in fact, fairly decent striptease for ALS that was on YouTube. You might want to check that out. I'm just saying, that was pretty good. So you are wondering why me. It was a grueling test. It was, fingerprinting, a lot of background checks, went down to autobiographical material with footnotes, and then waterboarding. And I said, Janice, seriously, just let me introduce him. And, she's kind of mean, Janice. I don't have to tell you that, but I don't care why. I know there's many more people, more erudite, the high academic muck-de-mucks that could bust out a real sweet literary criticism of him. I know there's some major orators here that I've heard, give a obituary as long as their arm without coming up for air. So I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm just saying there may be more qualified, but there's nobody more enthusiastic about this author, and nobody that's more excited to be here. So the onus is really on me. I have to, now that I got the job, really think of something fabulous to say. It has to match my adoration of my favorite author, and so I'm thinking back on all the artists, all the wonderful authors that we've had here, and all the different events and the people introducing them, and I'm thinking, what is it? What can I do? What can I say? And all I can think of is every time I've been at one of these and somebody's introducing, there's this little voice in my head that gets kind of louder and louder, and all that I want the person to do is sit down and shut up. And that little voice gets louder and louder, and I try not to, in my Tourette's yell. But, I figure that's really kind of true. You've already paid the price. You guys have invested your time. Some of you have come a long distance to hear the author, so I don't need to, encourage you. I don't need to, sell you on this evening. I just really need to get out of the way. The flyleafs, the awards, I could list all those. He's got, piles and piles of awards, and if you're really into that, go ahead, Google it, download it, print it, take it to the framer, put it on your wall, whatever. But that's never made me turn a page in a book, and it's never certainly made me buy a book or continue moving in a book. So what it is, the content of that. And there's never been an award that's made me reread a book, my highest compliment, and I've reread plenty of Neil's books. But just in case there might be one or two people that wandered off the street, that, landed from a different planet, that their husband or wife dragged them here and they have no idea why they're here, they have no idea how lucky they are or who Neil Gaiman is, I'm just going to tell you a couple of things that I feel that I think about Neil and his craft. Neil Gaiman is one of the very few non-derivative voices in literature today, I think. It's certainly not because he doesn't have influence. There's a lot of echoes from people. In fact, I would love to see Neil in a room with, like, Ray Bradbury, Stephen King, Gabriel Garcia Marquez kind of kicking back. That would be an awesome show. But he takes those voices and those influences, and he's created his own very unique style, his own language, his own unique world, and we all get to be a part of that. He has infested my conscious and unconscious mind, and it's gotten to the point where I can't walk by a graveyard without looking to see if there's a little boy slipping into the mausoleum, and realizing that the cemetery has become a place, a model of domesticity and not death. That when I enter a dark room, like in Neverwhere, there's, all I can think of is that bridge of darkness where the darkness was solid and real, and it slipped down my throat and behind my eyes. And, you know, look at the stars at night, and I'm kind of forced to reevaluate and reconsider the nature of stars. What are stars made of? What is stardust, anyway? And ultimately, am I the other mother? I'm thinking maybe my kids would have an argument with that I am. He has made me the derivative voice by viewing and repeating the reality that he has created, and his deliciously described prose is now embedded in me. And thank heaven I'm not an author. Thank heaven I'm a painter, not an author, because at least then nobody can see the plagiarism so easily. And trust me, I plagiarize him plenty. There's a world of his language where I question my reality and I accept his. There's one person, I wish I had said this, but Benjamin Percy did, and I'll read it, except for I can't really because he wadded this up so much. His mind is a dark, fathomless ocean, and every time I sink into it, this world fades, replaced by one far more terrible and beautiful, in which I will happily drown. When you create a world that redefines ordinary experience, that steals away everything that you've known and replaces it with, like, Neil Gaiman powder in your eyes, so you're all of a sudden a child again, and you're looking at things a different way, and you have a different language to perceive things. This is what Neil Gaiman does for me. And that's when you know that you're making good art. And Neil Gaiman makes good art. So, blah, blah, blah. I can almost hear the vocalization of the little voices in your head saying, sit down and shut up. So I will. And it is my extraordinary pleasure to present to you, to all of you in my beloved Ogden, my beloved Neil Gaiman.
There is probably nothing worse than an introduction like that, to which one cannot possibly live up unless the ceiling had opened and I had descended in clouds of glory, whatever they are. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, everybody. So, I am a writer. It's what I do. It's what I do for a living. People come up to me and they say, thank you so much for writing your books. And I explain that I have no other marketable skills. This is it. I started out as a writer in my very early 20s, determined to write. And I wrote a book. I wrote it by hand. And at the same time, I bought myself a Teach Yourself How to Type book. and it was teach yourself how to type in 15 lessons. And every day I would type my book using the lessons. But unfortunately, I finished writing the book before I finished the How to Type course. So I am a fantastic six-finger typist. I think there are very few six-finger typists, but I got up to lesson 6, and then I had to finish my book. And I sent it out, and it came back from a publisher with a note saying, not quite right for us. And I decided at the ripe old age of almost 22 that I was obviously not doing this right. And what I needed to do was find out how everything worked. So I got up the next day, and I was a journalist. Because I thought, they know how things work. And you're allowed to ask questions. And nobody bought my book. I'd only sent it to one publisher. But they hadn't bought it, so I was doomed. So I got on the phone, and after probably about 2 hours of phoning, I found an editor who was willing to commission me to write something. I was pitching stories, pitching interviews. And he said, yeah, sounds great. He said, by the way, who else have you written for? And I thought, oh, I'm doomed. So I lied. I listed the kinds of magazines that I felt like I ought to have written for. Because in those pre-Google days, nobody was ever going to check. And he said, that sounds great. Yep, you're commissioned. In the years that followed, it became a point of honor for me to have written for every single one of the magazines I listed that day to get my first job. And I wrote for the Sunday Times magazine, and I wrote for the Mail on Sunday, and I wrote for Time Out, and I wrote for all these guys, so that I didn't lie. I was just chronologically challenged. And I was a journalist for about 4 or 5 years, and it was really interesting. I learned a lot, and one of the things I learned was that I wasn't a very good journalist. I lacked the journalism, the English journalism. This is not an American thing, but it was a very English thing. I lacked the English journalism killer instinct. You need a certain killer instinct. And one day, I realized that I wasn't going to be a journalist anymore. The phone rang, and it was an editor who I'd worked with before, and she phoned and she said, Neil, you're our person who knows books and fantasy and science fiction and all of that stuff. Do you know anything at all about Dungeons and Dragons? And I said, well, yes, I have friends who play Dungeons and Dragons, who do live-action role-playing. She said, great, we're going to give you the front cover and the center pages. And I'm going, that is real money. Whoa, that's cool. You get the front cover, they're giving me the front cover of the newspaper. And I said, why? And she said, well, we need an article that shows that playing Dungeons and Dragons drives people to madness, suicide, and Satanism. And I said, no. And she said, what do you mean, no? And I said, I don't think I'm working for you anymore. And put down the phone. And that was my exit from journalism. I sort of sidled away at that point. And I wrote comics. These days, we're in the New York Times, and we have our own bestseller list, and it says graphic novels. But back then it was comics. And it was very embarrassing to write comics. You weren't even in the gutter. You were in the drain that the gutter ran into. That was writing comics back then, and I loved it. And I actually rather loved being in the gutter. I remember the first time that I realized that the gutter levels were rising. I was in England, and I was talking to the books editor of a very posh newspaper called the Daily Telegraph. And he was saying, so what do you do then? And I said, well, I write comics. And he looked like he'd suddenly found himself in conversation with somebody who had said, well, I kill people. But he couldn't really just leave, so he was like, oh, and what kind of comics would they be then? And I said, well, I write a comic called Sandman, which is a monthly comic from DC Comics. I'm doing a thing, just did a thing called Violent Cases. I'm doing a comic called Signal to Noise, currently in the face. He said, hang on, I've heard of you. You're Neil Gaiman. I said, well, yes. He said, my dear fellow, you do not write comics. You write graphic novels. And I felt like a hooker who had just learned she was a lady of the evening. I was like, oh, okay. And I wrote comics. I got to co-write a novel in there with Terry Pratchett, who is one of the most wonderful people in the world. And we co-wrote a novel called Good Omens, which I like to think of as the single funniest novel ever written about the end of the world and how we're all going to die. I finished Sandman, and then went off and just did odd things. There was Stardust. There was a great big, very weird novel, very, very, very much for adults, called American Gods, which, if the stars are right and everything works, will actually turn up on your televisions in about 18 months. Then I followed up American Gods, puzzling the heck out of pretty much everybody with a book for children called Coraline, about a little girl who goes through a door that shouldn't be there and meets her other mother, who has big black buttons for eyes. And it was really fun publishing Coraline, partly because kids weren't scared by it, and adults were terrified. I handed it in to my agent, Merrily, and she read it, and she said, it's great, I'll hand it over to your adult editor. And I said, no, it's a kid's book. She said, it can't be a kid's book. I finished it, I went around the flat, turning on all the lights. I said, no, it is a kid's book. I said, I'll tell you what. That microphone does not like me. I said, I will tell you what. You have two daughters. They are 8 years old and 6 years old. Read it to them. If they are perceptibly traumatized by this, I will obviously pay for therapy for the rest of their lives. If they like it and they aren't scared, it will be published as a children's book. And she phoned me up a week later and she said, they love it. Morgan and Emily just loved it. I was so wrong. And she sent it off to be published as a children's book, and it was. And years later, it was a movie, beautiful movie, which we saw some stills from by Henry Selick. And the year after that, it was an off-Broadway musical. And I went to the off-Broadway musical, and I was actually sitting next to Merrill's daughter, Morgan. And at the end of the musical, I turned to her and I said, you know, this is all because of you. I said, it was because you weren't scared. And she said, are you crazy? I was terrified. She said, but I had to hide it because I wanted to find out how it ended. So Coraline basically exists as a kid's book because Morgan de Fiore lied. I thought I would read a few things and then carry on talking. I ought to be reading this off my iPad. But apparently they've just done some magical upgrade to the operating system, so it can no longer recognize my files. It's so clever. So this is, so last year I was approached by, of all people, BlackBerry. And they said, would you like to do something with social media? And I said, what? And they said, whatever you like. And I said, yes. They said, actually, we have a great idea. Do you have any ideas? And I said, yes, I do. I will go out on Twitter with 12 fairly random questions. And, you know, what's dangerous about January? What would you love to see again in February? Things like that. You know, what would you burn in November? And then people will answer, and I'll just pretty much randomly pick 12 answers, and I'll write a short story about each one and do it all in public and demystify the process of writing for people. And they said, we're not even going to tell you what our idea was because we like that. So I did it. And it was really fun, and I thought I'd read you one of those stories. And because even though we are now actually heading toward the middle of November, just looking around here, especially at the Butler, it is so gloriously Halloween-y that I thought I would do the October tale. That feels good, I said, and I stretched my neck to get out the last of the cramp. It didn't just feel good, it felt great, actually. I'd been squashed up inside that lamp for so long. You start to think that nobody's ever going to rub it again. You're a genie, said the young lady with the polishing cloth in her hand. I am. You're a smart girl, Toots. What gave me away? The appearing in a puff of smoke, she said. And you look like a genie. You've got the turban and the pointy shoes. I folded my arms and blinked. Now I was wearing blue jeans, grey sneakers, and a faded grey sweater, the male uniform of this time and this place. I raised a hand to my forehead and I bowed deeply. I am the genie of the lamp, I told her. Rejoice, O fortunate one. I have it in my power to grant you 3 wishes. And don't try the I wish for more wishes thing. I won't play and you'll lose a wish. Right, go for it. I folded my arms again. No, she said. I mean, thanks and all that, but it's fine. I'm good. Honey, I said. Toots, sweetie, perhaps you misheard me. I'm a genie. And the 3 wishes? We're talking anything you want. You ever dreamed of flying? I can give you wings. You want to be wealthy, richer than Croesus. You want power, just say it. 3 wishes, whatever you want. Like I said, she said, thanks, I'm fine. Would you like something to drink? You must be parched after spending so much time in that lamp. Wine? Water? Tea? Actually, now she came to mention it, I was thirsty. Do you have any mint tea? She made me some mint tea in a teapot that was almost a twin to the lamp in which I'd spent the greater part of the last 1,000 years. Thank you for the tea. No problem. But I don't get it. Everyone I've ever met, they start asking for things. A fancy house, a harem of gorgeous women. Not that you'd want that, of course. I might, she said. You can't just make assumptions about people. Oh, and don't call me Toots or Sweetie or any of those things. My name's Hazel. Ah, I understood. You want a beautiful woman, then? My apologies. You have but to wish. I folded my arms. No, she said, I'm good. No wishes. How's the tea? I told her that the mint tea was the finest I had ever tasted. She asked me when I had started feeling a need to grant people's wishes and whether I felt a desperate need to please. She asked about my mother, and I told her that she could not judge me as she would judge mortals, for I was a djinn, powerful and wise, magical and mysterious. She asked me if I liked hummus. And when I said that I did, she toasted a pita bread and sliced it up for me to dip into the hummus. I dipped my bread slices into the hummus and ate it with delight. The hummus gave me an idea. Just make a wish, I said helpfully, and I could have a meal fit for a sultan brought into you. Each dish would be finer than the one before, and all served upon golden plates. And you could keep the plates afterwards. It's good, she said with a smile. Would you like to go for a walk? We walked together through the town. It felt good to stretch my legs after so many years in the lamp. We wound up in a public park, sitting on a bench by a lake. It was warm but gusty, and the autumn leaves fell in flurries each time the wind blew. I told Hazel about my youth as a djinn, of how we used to eavesdrop on the angels and how they would throw comets at us if they spied us listening. I told her of the bad days of the djinn wars and how King Suleiman had imprisoned us inside hollow objects, bottles, lamps, clay pots, that kind of thing. She told me of her parents, who were both killed in the same plane crash and who had left her the house. She told me of her job, illustrating children's books, a job she had backed into accidentally at the point she realized she would never be a really competent medical illustrator, and of how happy she became whenever she was sent a new book to illustrate. She told me she taught life drawing to adults at the local community college, one evening a week. I saw no obvious flaw in her life, no hole that she could fill by wishing, save one. Your life is good, I told her, but you have no one to share it with. Wish, and I will bring you the perfect man or woman, a film star, a rich person. No need. I'm good, she said. We walked back to her house, past houses dressed for Halloween. This is not right, I told her. People always want things. Not me. I've got everything I need. Then what do I do? She thought for a moment. Then she pointed at her front yard. Can you rake the leaves? Is that your wish? Nope, just something you could do while I'm getting our dinner ready. I raked the leaves into a heap by the hedge to stop the wind from blowing it apart. After dinner, I washed up the dishes. I spent the night in Hazel's spare bedroom. It wasn't that she didn't want help. She let me help. I ran errands for her, picked up art supplies and groceries. On days she had been painting for a long time, she let me rub her neck and shoulders. I have good, firm hands. Shortly before Thanksgiving, I moved out of the spare bedroom, across the hall into the main bedroom, and Hazel's bed. I watched her face this morning as she slept. I stared at the shapes her lips make when she sleeps. The creeping sunlight touched her face, and she opened her eyes and stared at me. And she smiled. You know what I never asked, she said, is what about you? what would you wish for if I asked what your 3 wishes were? I thought for a moment. I put my arm around her, and she snuggled her head into my shoulder. It's okay, I told her. I'm good. And this is a poem I wrote. And one of the things I like about this poem is different people, it obviously means different things to different people. And I learned that first time I learned that it got read at weddings. And people now come up to me and they say, what's it really about? And I say, I think it's probably mostly about paying attention. And it's called The Day the Saucers Came. That day, the saucers landed, hundreds of them, golden, silent, coming down from the sky like great snowflakes. And the people of Earth stood and stared as they descended, waiting dry-mouthed to find what waited inside for us, and none of us knowing if we would be here tomorrow. But you didn't notice it, because that day, the day the saucers came, by some coincidence, was the day that the graves gave up their dead. And the zombies pushed up through soft earth or erupted, shambling and dull-eyed, unstoppable, came towards us, the living, and we screamed and ran. But you did not notice this, because on the saucer day, which was the zombie day, it was Ragnarok also. And the television screens showed us a ship built of dead men's nails, a serpent, a wolf all bigger than the mind could hold, and the cameraman could not get far enough away, and then the gods came out. But you did not see them coming, because on the saucer zombie battling gods day, the floodgates broke, and each of us was engulfed by genies and sprites offering us wishes and wonders and eternities and charm and cleverness and true brave hearts and pots of gold, while giants fee-fo-fummed across the land and killer bees. But you had no idea of any of this, because that day, the saucer day, the zombie day, the Ragnarok and fairies day, the day the great winds came and snows and the cities turned to crystal, the day all plants died, plastics dissolved, the day the computers turned, the screens telling us we would obey, the day angels, drunk and muddled, stumbled from the bars and all the bells of London were sounded, the day animals spoke to us in Assyrian, the Yeti day, the fluttering capes and arrival of the time machine day. You didn't notice any of this because you were sitting in your room, not doing anything, not even reading, not really, just looking at your telephone, wondering if I was going to call. So, one of the things that I found as I became a writer was not actually particularly enthusiastically. It wasn't like I volunteered. But I found myself a voice for libraries. And I found myself a voice for literacy. And partly that's enlightened self-interest. What I do is read by literate people. The more literate people there are, as far as I'm concerned, the better. On the other hand, I would also find myself occasionally at events like this, listening to speakers. I remember I was in New York about a decade ago, listening to the head of the school system in New York, telling us that there are companies out there across America who build prisons. It's what they do. And because building prisons and planning prisons takes a long time, and because you don't want lots of unused prison cells, but you also don't want overcrowded prisons, they try and estimate how many prison cells they're going to need. And he was explaining that the algorithm that they use is basically 11-year-old literacy levels. It's a really good, he was saying it's a really good algorithm. 11, 12-year-old kids who really can't read functionally, how many of them, your percentage of them, is something that you then invest in building prison cells. And it's not a one-to-one thing. That doesn't say everybody who is illiterate, everybody who has reading problems is going to wind up in prison. What it says is there are huge connections between literacy and criminality, between literacy and being a functioning member of society. And from where I stand, probably one of the biggest ones of those is empathy. One of the best things that fiction does is it puts you into somebody else's head. You get to look out. Think of a favorite book. Whatever your favorite book was growing up. To Kill a Mockingbird, whatever it was. You got to look out through somebody else's head. You got to think their thoughts. You got to realize something that is actually one of the most fundamental building blocks of forming a society, which is that everybody else out there is a me as well. And they matter. And they think, and they feel, and they believe. And that is something that fiction can give you, that you're never going to get from a film, you're never going to get it from television. You're never going to get it from a first-person shooter game. But you'll get it from fiction. A writer somewhere has taken 26 letters and a handful of punctuation marks and some spaces, put them in certain orders, given them to you, and you've decoded them. And you've used what you've decoded to build an entire world in your head and populate it with people and experience what they experienced and cry when they're hurt and triumph when they win. And that's huge. And the other thing that you get is you get to imagine. And imagining is something that we take absolutely and utterly for granted. Even I imagine for a living. And I remember the day I stopped taking it for granted. I was in China in 2007, and I'd been invited to the first Communist Party Chinese approved science fiction convention in the history of China. They'd had like two sort of very secret and kind of frowned on ones over the years. But this was the first one that was approved of. And there were a whole bunch of American writers out there. And then there was me, because they thought I was American. And by about day 2, day 3, I was getting on well enough with the people who were running the convention, which was really strange. And you know, there was a point where we're all sort of being honored with a march past in front of a statue of Mao. And I'm going, this is really odd. And I took these guys aside and I said, what? Explain this to me. I want to know. Why is it, up until now, you've always disapproved of science fiction? And I understand you disapproving of science fiction, because in science fiction, you can't tell if somebody's making fun of you or not. You can't tell if they're undermining you. I was talking to a Chinese writer about his last novel, and he was explaining it was all set in a gigantic anthill filled with intelligent ants and some rebel ants. And I'm going, so, nobody's quite sure. Is he criticizing the state here or not? Is he just writing about ants? I said, I understand you guys disapproving, but why have you changed this around? And they said, well, we were looking at what we do really, really well. What we do really, really well right now is make things better than anybody else. But we don't innovate, and we're not coming up with the great inventions. Over the years, China has come up with fantastic inventions. We invented, all these things like paper and noodles and gunpowder. Gunpowder, paper, noodles. But these days, you guys invent the iPhones and things, and then you bring them here and we make them. He said, so we went to America and we started talking to people. We went to Google and we went to Apple, we went to Microsoft, and we just interviewed their most creative people. And we discovered that they'd all read science fiction when they were kids. So we now approve of it. And I thought, that's actually completely fascinating, because what it says is that the imagination is a muscle. And it's a muscle that we take completely for granted. You don't, during the course of a normal day, it doesn't occur to any of us that everything we see, everything we look at, everything that's here, somebody had to imagine it first. Somebody had to make it up. And not just artificial butlers and carriage clocks. But there must have been a time when somebody said, sitting on rocks is all very well, but what if there were chairs? There's everything you see, even strange microphones. Somebody invented it, and before it was invented, it was imagined. And I think that's the other thing that fiction gives us. Gives us the ability to imagine and to see that the world that we are in doesn't have to be that world. And the ability to change the world, especially for the young, showing them that, I think, is vital. And that was the other reason why I got much too heavily involved in literacy, in supporting libraries, in supporting schools. I thought I'd finish with another story, if that's okay with you. And again, mostly because of the coming into this space and looking around at Gaiman Manor and noticing that I now have dead relatives on the wall who I've never met, and a vampire over in the corner there, and mysterious sofas, and the shadows of trees. And I thought, as I sat down to have my dinner, Julie turned to me and she said, it must be like this wherever you go and give talks. And it's like, no. Nope, this is it. There has never been another stuffed butler. Probably some of you out there think I travel everywhere with a stuffed butler and brought him with, but no. You guys provided the stuffed butler. But I thought I'd finish with a little story that might be just a little bit scary. But given that there are young people here, maybe not too scary. And it's got a very silly title. It's called Click Clack the Rattlebag. Before you take me up to bed, will you tell me a story? Do you actually need me to take you up to bed? I asked the boy. He thought for a moment. Then, with intense seriousness, yes, actually, I think you do. It's because I've finished my homework, and so it's my bedtime, and I am a bit scared. Not very scared, just a bit. But it is a very big house, and lots of times the lights don't work, and it's sort of dark. I reached over and tousled his hair. I can understand that, I said. It is a very big old house. He nodded. We were in the kitchen, where it was light and warm. I put down my magazine on the kitchen table. What kind of story would you like me to tell you? Well, he said thoughtfully, I don't think it should be too scary, because then when I go up to bed, I would just be thinking about monsters the whole time. But if it isn't just a little bit scary, then I won't be interested. And you make up scary stories, don't you? I know she says that's what you do. She exaggerates. I write stories, yes. Nothing that's really been published yet, though. And I write lots of different kinds of stories. But you do write scary stories. Yes. The boy looked up at me from the shadows by the door where he was waiting. Do you know any stories about Click Clack the Rattlebag? I don't think so. Those are the best sorts of stories. Do they tell them at your school? He shrugged. Sometimes. What's a Click Clack the Rattlebag story? He was a precocious child and was unimpressed by his sister's boyfriend's ignorance. You could see it on his face. Everybody knows them. I don't, I said, trying not to smile. He looked at me as if he was trying to decide whether or not I was pulling his leg. He said, I think maybe you should take me up to my bedroom, and then you can tell me a story before I go to sleep. But probably it should be a not scary story, because I'll be up in my bedroom then, and it's actually a bit dark up there too. I said, shall I leave a note for your sister, telling her where we are? You can, but you'll hear when they get back. The front door is very slammy. We walked out of the warm and cozy kitchen into the hallway of the big house, where it was chilly and drafty and dark. I flicked the light switch, but the hall remained dark. The bulb's gone, the boy said. That always happens. Our eyes adjusted to the shadows. The moon was almost full, and blue-white moonlight shone in through the high windows on the staircase, down into the hall. We'll be all right, I said. Yes, said the boy soberly. I am very glad you're here. He seemed less precocious now. His hand found mine, and he held on to my fingers comfortably, trustingly, as if he'd known me all his life. I felt responsible and adult. I did not know if the feeling I had for his sister, who was my girlfriend, was love. Not yet. But I liked that the child treated me as one of the family. I felt like his big brother, and I stood taller, and if there was something unsettling about the empty house, I would not have admitted it for worlds. The stairs creaked beneath the threadbare stair carpet. Click-clacks, said the boy, are the best monsters ever. Are they from television? I don't think so. I don't think any people know where they come from. Mostly, they come from the dark. Good place for a monster to come. Yes. We walked along the upper corridor in the shadows, walking from patch of moonlight to patch of moonlight. It really was a big house. I wished I had a flashlight. They come from the dark, said the boy, holding on to my hand. I think probably they're made of dark, and they come in when you don't pay attention. That's when they come in, and then they take you back to their, not nests. What's a word that's like nests, but not? House? No, it's not house. Lair? He was silent. Then, I think that's the word, yes, lair. He squeezed my hand. He stopped talking. Right, so they take the people who don't pay attention back to their lair. And what do they do then, your monsters? Do they suck all the blood out of you like vampires? He snorted. Vampires don't suck all the blood out of you. They only drink a little bit, just to keep them going and, flying around. Click-clacks are much scarier than vampires. I'm not scared of vampires, I told him. Me neither. I'm not scared of vampires either. Do you want to know what click-clacks do? They drink you, said the boy. Like a Coke. Coke is very bad for you, said the boy. If you put a tooth in Coke in the morning, it will be dissolved into nothing. That's how bad Coke is for you, and why you must always clean your teeth every night. I'd heard the Coke story as a boy, and had been told as an adult that it wasn't true, but was certain that a lie which promoted dental hygiene was a good lie, and I let it pass. Click-clacks drink you, said the boy. First, they bite you, and then you go all icky inside, and all your meat and all your brains and everything except your bones and your skin turns into a wet milkshakey stuff, and then the click-clack sucks it out through the holes where your eyes used to be. That's disgusting, I told him. Did you make it up? We'd reached the last flight of stairs all the way into the big house. No. I can't believe you kids make up stuff like that. You didn't ask me about the rattle bag, he said. Right. What's the rattle bag? Well, he said sagely, a small voice from the darkness beside me. Once you're just bones and skin, they hang you up on a hook and you rattle in the wind. So what do these click-clacks look like? Even as I asked him, I wished I could take the question back and leave it unasked. I thought huge, spidery creatures like the one in the shower this morning. I'm afraid of spiders. I was relieved when the boy said, they look like what you aren't expecting, what you aren't paying attention to. We were climbing wooden steps now. I held on to the railing on my left, held his hand with my right as he walked beside me. It smelled like dust and old wood, that high in the house. The boy's tread was certain, though, even though the moonlight was scarce. Do you know what story you're going to tell me to put me to bed? He asked. Like I said, it doesn't actually have to be scary. Not really. Maybe you could tell me about this evening. Tell me what you did. Oh, that won't make much of a story for you. My girlfriend just moved into a new place on the edge of town. She inherited it from an aunt or someone. It's very big and very old. I'm going to spend my first night with her tonight, so I've been waiting for an hour or so for her and her housemates to come back with the wine and an Indian takeaway. See? Said the boy. There was that precocious amusement again, but all kids can be insufferable sometimes when they think they know something you don't. It's probably good for them. You know all that, but you don't think. You just let your brain fill in the gaps. He pushed open the door to the attic room. It was perfectly dark now, but the opening door disturbed the air, and I heard things rattle gently, like dry bones in thin bags, in the slight wind. Click, clack, click, clack, like that. I would have pulled away then, if I could, but small, firm fingers pulled me forward, unrelentingly, into the dark. A story to be thought of just when you go to bed tonight after turning out the light. Anyway. Basically, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here. It is an honor to be able to do something for something like the Ogden School Foundation, which is educating, which is making sure that kids get opportunities, which is supporting music, literacy, creation, and the imagination. And for that, I'd like you to give yourselves a hand. Thank you very much.